Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Rowe.
And I'm Nique,
and welcome to The Invisible Men, where we make the achievements of incredible men invisible no more. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
I'm Nique, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI.
Hey, Nique, as always, good to see you. And as our viewers know, The Invisible Men is all about highlighting Black excellence and examples of Black men who are doing some amazing work that you might not be aware of, but we're trying to bring it to the forefront. And today we have a true Renaissance man. We've got Charles Love. Welcome, Charles.
Well, thank you. Hopefully I can live up to the honor, but I truly appreciate being here.
Well, Charles, I think you are, kindred spirits in terms of your work and education. You're the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence. You will have to tell us about. You're an author of an upcoming book called Race Crazy. You've got a radio show, the Charles Love Show. You've got a podcast coming up that Cut the Bull. That actually you're doing with Will Riley, Dr. Will Riley, who was a guest on The Invisible Men. So you have a lot going on that we want to talk to you about. But before you get into the Charles Love of today, the person who's been able to do all these amazing things, tell us a little bit of just about your backstory, any defining moments that helped chart your path to who you've actually become now.
Well, I love talking about this as often as I can, actually. It's funny that that's your first question, because I think that I have a very similar background to a lot of Black men growing up in America, with some very interesting differences that were nuanced and I didn't notice when I was younger, but I started to notice as I got over. And I look back and I realized that that's why I kind of reacted to them differently. And recently on the show, I had my brother on to talk about our childhood. And he was like, why? I'm like, it's pretty interesting and you don't get it. So I grew up in Gary, Indiana, and we grew up poor, although I had to tell my mother and my brother that because they didn't think we were, because it was not like they thought poor meant we're not going to have the lights for a couple of weeks. I mean, that's a different level, abject poverty. But I'm like, you didn't take many vacations. You didn't have a savings. You couldn't afford to send your kids to college. You didn't have a new car. It's all these things. Just typical Black America, growing up in a majority Black town. Had both parents at home. My mother was a housewife. My father worked in the mill. And so I had a similar background to most people. The differences were, and what I found out later was interesting is, so my mom grew up in Gary, segregated, and had never been outside of Gary. My father was born in Oklahoma, but grew up in East Chicago, and he graduated from an integrated school where he was about 30% of the population, 70% was white. So he grew up, even though he was older, with lots of white friends. He had no issues with race. So he would tell us that the way to live through life is hard work. No one owes you anything, those traditional values, but also that, there's people that are racist, but you can't worry about what you can't control. And many people can be good and can be bad. You need to judge people based on their actions. And what's so unique about us is my mom didn't really share those views, but because we had this dangerous word you can't say today, patriarchy. So it was, my brother was born in the 60s. I was born in the early 70s. And it was different. So my mom was a housewife, so she didn't really share her opinion. So we heard what my father believed. But by the time we were 25 and 30, we'd start hearing these really radical things from my mom. And it was the first time we heard it. So it was interesting because I don't know, and I asked my brother and my mother this, what I would have been like had I been hearing that between 7 and 12. Instead of not hearing it until I was already grown and the foundation had been laid. So that's why I have kind of a unique experience. So I lived through a lot of the experience, being in Gary as a young adult when it was considered the murder capital of the country. And so seeing those same things, like, a lot of people, they look at especially Black conservatives and say, you don't have these experiences. You didn't live in these neighborhoods. I didn't leave Gary until I was 38 years old. So I was there pretty much my whole life. And then when I moved to Chicago, for the first 6 years I was there, I was in an all Black neighborhood. So I lived the Black experience. I just don't necessarily, live in it in the sense that I take everything as wrapped in race. So that gives me a kind of unique perspective, I believe.
So how does that compare to what you think some of your friends growing up in the same neighborhood?
Well, when I first noticed the difference, I don't know if it was that so much. I think a lot of it was two things. I always say the two biggest differences between my friends, because when we were young, we ran and played together. We had a lot of similar views and things of that nature. And it was the early 70s, so a lot of my friends still had their fathers at home. So the ones who grew up with just their mothers, it wasn't like now where you were born into a single mother parent. It was a progression. So their father left, or they got divorced, or their father died. So by the time we were in junior high school or high school, then they were in a single parent household. And my father was older, so he retired when I was in the 6th grade. And my mom was a housewife, so they were both like literally in the house for the last 6 years I was in school. The other difference is my paternal grandparents we would visit in the summer, and they lived in a small town in northern Texas, and it was a really small rural area with very few Black people. So every summer I saw white people. My father had this idea about people in general. And by the time I started high school, everybody was just different. Everybody was militant. Everybody was like, the white man is this. And I just hadn't lived that experience and hadn't seen that, even though we lived, four houses down. But they never got out an idea. I mean, even though it was just to go visit or to get some other experiences, they just never left Gary. So if that's all you see, then you have a very small scope of what the world is like.
Interesting. And so fast forward then. So how did you then take this mindset into your academic experience and what you have now started to build? Or how you
Well, I kind of came to that even differently. So I was your typical person. I'm worried about, raising a family or, paying bills. I'm not really paying attention to what's going on in politics or the greater culture. But I started to hear some things that just simply didn't make sense. And the catalyst was Obama's election, but not in a way for most people. When he was elected, I was surprised. I was more like, it was exciting in the sense that, wow, we knew this could happen at some point, but we didn't think it would happen now. But I looked at it like him being a Chicago guy. I worked in Chicago, even though I lived in Northwest Indiana. It's like, it didn't seem like he had that much experience, but we'll see what happens. But through his first term, watching all the people who were my contemporaries, who weren't just like me paying attention to politics, become political scholars overnight, because everything was like, well, no president has ever been treated this bad before. I'm like, like 7 of them got shot. I mean, let's keep this in context, right? Or no one's ever said this. It was just this, Obama's being treated so poorly, and this is all about race. And because I had been, even though I wasn't following politics then, I was reading a lot of history in my 20s and paying attention to those kind of cycles, because what's repeating itself, what's not, what is just human nature. And so I started writing about how odd it is that we have these, at the time, 35, 40-year-old people who have these views, but they're totally different from the life they're living. And so that's what I talk about. I was talking about Woodson. He was on the show last week, and we were talking about the Black community and how we approach the problem. So he was talking about the victim mentality. And I don't like to use the victim mentality, even though it fits for some, because I'm sure you too, being successful Black men, have some people in your circle who are like this. And these are the people that I think hurt the Black community the most, even though it's not intentional. They are successful Black people. They went to the best schools. They have great jobs. They live in a wonderful life. They have summer homes. They do all that. But they'll say stuff like, man, it's hard out here for Black people. Black people are being this. The police are hunting us down. They're saying that, there are no opportunities, but they're living so well. So you have to ask, I get why a poor person would think that, but why does this person think that? They don't have a victim mentality, right? They're living a wonderful life. They go to Martha's Vineyard every year. They believe that because of the power and the impact of the narrative that's being spun. You hear it enough times in the media, or you watch enough movies that keep telling you this is the case, then at some point, even though your life doesn't reflect that, you start to mimic it. So I say to my friends, so they'll give me this stuff, and I'll say, well, when's the last time you were followed around a store or profile? Well, obviously now they're in their 40s and 50s. So I'm like, man, I can't remember a time, maybe 10 years ago. So, but you speak as if you're feeling this weight on your shoulders every day. Like it's hard to live your life. And they don't even realize they're doing it. They just laugh. It's like, I didn't even realize that. They worry about police shootings, but not the shootings in their neighborhood. And you'll say, how many shootings were in your neighborhood last week? 86.
Well, there is this phenomenon that people refer to called survivor's guilt, right? That if you're a Black person
right.
who's done well academically, financially, you have a strong family, you live well, you're able to vacation, you have lots of privilege, far superior to many whites in the country. And as a result, but when you see a George Floyd, there's this connection that you almost have to, you feel that you have to say that you're privy, you're subject to these same atrocities. So
Yes.
I mean, that seems to be for a lot of, or at least for some successful Black people, it's a necessary part of their identity to preserve that element of victimhood.
Right. But what I always talk about is solutions, because the only thing that really matters to me, we can have fun, we can talk about why we think things happen, but if we think there's a problem, we want to solve it. Let's get to the root of the problem and find out ways to solve it. But we don't do that. We talk about the actions that come from the root of the problem and never address the root of the problem. So I would say to that, and I get that, and I believe there's some degree of that, but I would say if you believe that, so like I left Gary, and because it was a common thing for those who weren't in the gangs or in the bad areas or doing bad things. In high school, everybody just knew, it's like, man, I can't wait till I graduate so I can get out of here. College, military, whatever. I'm getting away from here. Things are so bad. But I sat back. I was so I spent 20 years in the restaurant industry acting, came back to get my degree later and do all the finance and do all this stuff later. So I was managing restaurants, and about 2006 or 7, I was like, well, I know what the problem with Gary is. It's not the white man. It's not politicians. It's not any of that. It's that everybody who has a chance, who just has they may not even have that much education, but they have the gumption and the grit to get up and do something, they leave. So the city's only left with the people who are failing. So if we don't go back, then that's going to be the problem. So I went and I opened a restaurant in Gary, right? And a friend of mine who's a pediatrician, he and his wife went back and opened a practice in Gary. So I said, those are the things that are going to make the difference. So I get most upset at the middle class. When we say the Bernie Sanders wing say we need higher taxes, or someone else say, well, there's racism, we need the government to fix those ills. But at the same time, we can debate that political stuff and say whether that's true or not. I really don't care whether that's true. I think the bigger problem is all you people making between $75,000 and $300,000 a year who aren't dropping a dime, or not just money, mentoring. You're not going back to school. You're not saying, hey, I'm a chef. Come and let me show you what it's like to not just fry fries in a McDonald's, but to actually create. Or you're a painter, or you're an investment banker, showing them the things that you can do. Because most of these people have never seen these opportunities. You have people on the south and west side of Chicago who've never been to downtown for years. My mom grew up in Gary, and she's 85 now. And outside of like maybe 3 occasions where I had to push her, she's never left Gary. So if you grow up like that as a young Black man, coming from a single mom and having all these other additional struggles that's been growing over the years, how is anything going to change if you leave them to their own device and say, I'm successful? And I say, man, I wish that you all were doing successful. If Biden or Trump or whoever the president of the day is did more for you, I think you'd have a chance, but you're kind of at a loss now. Sorry. But we don't want to put the skin in. I had friends who were really successful and say, well, how do we help them? I'm willing to pay more taxes. But one, we've proven that just money alone is not enough. And you're doing it because that's the easy cop out. You make plenty of money. So to drop an extra $5,000 in your tax bucket where you can't control where it goes won't do anything. So I need people, middle class people, to put skin in the game. Mentorships, donate money to organizations rather than government. And that's the true solution. But we don't want to do that.
Ian, I think we have another case here where you did a great job of introducing Charles, but we forgot the title entrepreneur. Because it's a true entrepreneur, who also, made the effort to build a business where others were not. So Charles, I celebrate that. I want to just go back to your mom, because I'd love to hear how she views your evolution, your growth, and your leadership as a voice for a philosophy. Is she moved at all in her position, or is she still?
It is so amazing and so awesome talking about mom, because mom is just mom, right? And she gets it to the point that she laughs at herself. She knows that there's no deep logic in it, but you can, I mean, it's baked in. I'm an octogenarian. It's not really going to change. So I joke, I talk about her a lot on the radio. She listens to the show and she laughs, but she's like, one way I describe her, I say, she is, in her views, Ted Cruz, but out of her mouth, she's, filling the leftist political of the day. Maybe I wouldn't say AOC because she's got to be a Black one. She's Maxine Waters, okay? So she'll say stuff to me, but when you say politics, she's so ingrained in Democrat policy. So like, Republicans are evil, racist white people. right? But I don't talk party though. So I just say, what do you think about gay marriage, income taxes? What's the most that you should be taxed? All that kind of stuff. Then she sounds like a conservative. How are you going to take half of somebody's money? I don't care how much. I'm not worried about what somebody else makes. You shouldn't take half of somebody's money. The funniest one I used the most because it made me laugh. She called me in a rant, in a tizzy over mail-in voting. Like it was crazy. Who is the genius that thought up of this? It's bad. Both sides cheat. There's no way people should be in mail-in voting. I'm 80 years old. If I can go stand in line, they can stand in line. I'm totally 100% against mail-in voting. And I said, you sure about that? Because I know which side's pushing it, even if it didn't. I don't care who's pushing it. I don't care who's pushing it. Nobody's moving me. 3 days later, Michelle Obama does a PSA. So I called her. I said, remember we were talking about mail-in voting the other day, and, Michelle Obama just did a PSA. I want to know what you think. She's like, well, I guess if Michelle says it's good, maybe it's not that bad. So that's Mom. So she loves what I do. She's like, your show is really good. That person was really interesting, but still it'll be Republicans are bad. Democrats are doing these great things. I talked to her last night because my show airs on Sunday and usually she calls me out. I'll talk to her after the show, but I was in DC. So I called her. She's like, oh yeah, it was really good. And we did kind of like a promo of the podcast. And she said, it was good, but you had a guy on talking about policing and not wanting, it sounded like he was against defunding the police. And I said, yeah, he was. She's like, but I just want to know, Charles, where do these cops get this money from? And I said, what money? She said, the police officers, they're bailing like the guy and the white guy with the assault rifle. I said, Rittenhouse. Yeah, in Kenosha. She said, why are the cops bailing him out? Excuse me? She's like, yeah, I heard that the police were bailing him out. I said, people probably did a GoFundMe to raise money, but if the judge sets bail, you can go bail somebody else if you want. Anybody can go. What does that have to do with anything? Well, I just think the cops are just, spreading money around and they're doing this and they're using your tax dollars to bail these white people out. I'm like, what? Stop listening to whatever it is you're listening to besides my show. But yeah, so it's funny. It's like she gets it on some fronts, but she's never going to change.
Right.
I think you've just represented probably the relationship between a lot of sons and their moms in terms of that dialogue. That's fascinating in terms of the inner voice and the vocalized voice, for lack of a better phrase. Well, Charles, we'd love to move the conversation to what we call our speed round, where I'm going to present to you two opposing views, two opposing philosophies, or two individuals, and ask you to pick one and tell us why. So we'll start with free speech or free enterprise.
Ooh, free speech or free enterprise. Ooh, are they all this tight? I'm gonna have to say free speech. I'm gonna have to say free speech. And I would say that just off the top of my head, because can you have any other freedoms without it? Right? Because you can have free enterprise and open a business and somebody can say you have to bake this cake or else, or you can't do this or else, or you must put women or blacks on your board, or you must do this. So you can't really have one without the other. I'm gonna go with speech.
Wonderful. And of course, that question, it also speaks to the majesty of America, right? Where we get both, which is, right, awfully special. Malcolm or Martin?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Are you talking then or now? I got the Monday morning quarterback. I get to look back and I pick one of them and put them on the team now. No, I know who I'm going to pick and why. I'm going to say Malcolm, but mostly because the best for the Black community then and now would probably be an amalgamation of the two. But I pick Malcolm because look at what we talk about now. Most honest Black men sit around and talk about how the family structure is what's so important. And so Malcolm would be able to speak to the Blacks who are struggling now better than Martin, because Martin was, highly educated. Martin grew up, with his family intact, and Malcolm, got bounced around foster homes. So, they can't, he would come in today's words, he would come with the receipts. So I think today's Black youth would dismiss Martin and they wouldn't just be able to dismiss Malcolm. So I'm going to say Malcolm.
Powerful. Ian, someday we've got to pull the Malcolm Martin clips just by themselves and release that as an event, because it's so powerful, the intellect of our guests and how they look at that question.
That was
you get different answers each time?
Oh, absolutely. Even if it's the same choice, it's a different reason, which is fascinating. We got one more, Charles, and that, speaking of youth, JayZ or Kanye?
Am I trying to influence the youth or am I trying to entertain? No. This might shock most conservatives. I think this is a push, but I'm going to have to pick one. Okay. I'm going to have to pick one. I guess I have to go with Kanye because at least he's talking about free speech. But there are some things that they both do that get under my skin and things that they both do that I like. One, I'll give JayZ one. JayZ recently said after the George Floyd thing, when all the ire was on one side, was like, yes, burn it all down, whites are bad. He said, you got their attention, now what? I was like, kudos, JayZ. He didn't know what the answer was. He ended up going the wrong way, but at least he asked the question.
Okay. What was the way that he went?
He still went with the system thing. It's always the system. It's the easy, it's the low hanging fruit, but all right, it's not going to fix anything.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. All right. So let's talk about the alternative to the system, Seeking Educational Excellence. What is that organization all about?
Well, C was started, quite simply, 4 years ago, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. Kevin Jackson, former Fox News contributor, started it. So I came on right after that. And he just wanted to say, hey, let's focus on STEM. We want to solve some problems. Let's focus on STEM and not all the social justice stuff. A simple thing anybody can get on board with, even if you disagree with the second half of the social justice thing, you like STEM strong. But then the 1619 project came out and that flood came in and we started to push this stuff in the schools. And it became so difficult because there's so many, holes in the dam that you're trying to stop. So it became, what's the best approach to push the original plan? So I go to people, and as you can tell, I speak rather frankly. I speak in a way that everybody can just understand. It's simple. Just cut through the noise. We cut the bull. So what I say to people is like, think of all the Black people that are engineers, doctors, lawyers, PhDs, and all that kind of stuff. How many of them are unemployed? And I've been asking this question for 2 years. With a rare exception, everyone says none. So I said, so if we know that's the case, why are we focused so much on racism, which we all agree exists, when we can solve a lot of it? It's just the cops also aren't shooting doctors and engineers and CPAs. Shouldn't we just make more doctors, engineers, and CPAs? Won't that fix at least 70% of the problem right off the bat? And we do that by focusing on STEM. And I think that we're failing the kids, and the education should be the hill we're all willing to die on. Ian and I spoke briefly a few weeks ago. I don't know if he remembers. And I was telling him a story about my son. So my son's in kindergarten. And they made this grand announcement that they were going to start teaching STEM at the youngest age, starting with kindergartners and make it age appropriate. We were excited. And I started hearing the assignments, and it was like women in STEM, because women are generally marginalized. It was empathy, this, that, the other. It was Black, this, that, the other. So I called the teacher and asked what's going on. It's like, yeah, we want to make sure that we honor all the kids' cultures. And I said, well, what is Sebastian's culture? They're like, well, we don't know. I said, well, how can you celebrate it and elevate it when you don't know what it is? And it's like, if you were doing this in homeroom, maybe, but you're doing it in STEM. Teach them STEM. You want to help the Black man who's marginalized. Teach him STEM, right? That's what I want you to do. And they didn't get that.
Math. There's not a Black way to do math, right?
Exactly. Well, I don't know. I heard 2 + 2 = 4 is racist now, though. So that's the kind of things we push back on. So what we're going to do is we take a several pronged approach. So we talk about from the original idea, but we go on to say we want to be able to influence school boards because they're the people who are able to push what they, like while you're talking 1619, the people who can make the decision of what goes into school are them. So maybe we should get more people to run for the school board or come up with our own with curriculum that's different so we can offer them. So when those teachers are being pushed, you must teach race theory. We want to fight that battle, obviously, but while they're doing it, okay, you must teach theory, but you get 30% to pick your own tools. We want to give them tools. We want it to be civics and history that's separate from what they're already teaching. So, they can teach that, or you can go over here and we can give you a wider understanding of the fuller, because like you talk about, we know, Ian, the 1619 project, because we talk about it, we fight against it, that there's no positives in it. That's my biggest point. Everybody wants to talk about, should it be 1619 or 1620, Plymouth versus Jamestown, or were they right about, the Revolutionary War and all the facts that they got wrong? How about the fact that there's no positives? We need some positives in it.
Yep. So if someone wanted to bring Seeking Educational Excellence to their schools, how does that happen?
Well, unfortunately, because of COVID, it's going to be more virtual. We are working on a series of people to bring people to talk about education and what's important and the problems, but talk about what we do, but also talk about solutions and the issues. So most conservatives, unfortunately, think the school issue is school choice. I argue that you've let that ball roll too far. And now all the private schools are just as woke as the other schools. So you need to teach people to understand that there's problems in discipline, problems in the way we pay for school, problems in the curriculum, problems in critical thinking skills, gender, all that stuff. So we shoot these videos that talk about these issues and how to deal with them. And they'll be able to do those until we can bring some people out there. But eventually we want to kind of go and do some tours and go out and speak to people about what they can do in their communities to actually change things.
Got it. And Nique, I know you went to talk to Charles about his book.
Yeah, so as I dug into the articles, which are many, of Charles, I saw notice of an upcoming book with a very biting title and a great subtitle. I'll definitely be buying it. Charles, tell us more.
So Race Crazy, it's Race Crazy, BLM 1619 and the progressive racism movement. And I call it progressive racism because the actions and the way they view race is the same as the vicious, vile racism of the South, only they change the skin color and they feel that the reason is different, so they justify it. So that white man felt blacks were inherently dumber than whites, so he was a bad racist. We want to help certain groups of people, and we want to pick and choose who are honorable and who are not. So we're the good type of racist. But what they do is still like no whites here, only blacks here, bean counting. So how is it any different? And I saw, but the catalyst for the beginning was after George Floyd died, obviously, donations poured in. People started saying, I support Black Lives Matter without knowing what it was. And many of the people pushed back, did what they could, but they didn't dig deep enough. So they focused on the nuclear family attacks, which is great. It's true that they did that, and focused on the fact that they were saying that they wanted to defund the police and what that's going to lead in the neighborhoods. But they're leaving out what they really believe, because I think there's a lot of caring white people who just like, hey, I just see something bad and I want to fix it. But they don't really understand what they're supporting. So in the book, I highlight BLM from their own words and say, this is what they say. They say, we are anti-capitalist. We are abolitionists. We believe that America is hurting people all over the world. And who are they to stop people from coming across the border? We don't want discipline in schools. We want no one under 23 to be in jail and no one over 65 to be in jail. So you put that stuff in front of people and they're like, whoa, I'm an investment banker and I think some white people are racist and I'm willing to give you $100,000 towards ending racism and police brutality. But I don't know if I want to end capitalism. Right. So they need to know that. And then for the 1619 portion of the book, I literally read all the essays about 4 times and wrote a chapter on each essay about why they're either factually wrong or why, even if I give you your argument, which is the way I debate liberals, I don't call them names. It's just, even if you're right, giving you your argument, is what you're asking to do going to make the situation better or worse? So I highlight how, even if they're right about, traffic being racism or racist or police being racist, how is taking away all the police going to make it better? How is this going to make it better? What we should be doing is this. So I do that so people can see the two next to each other and logically say, well, I agree with them, not Charles, on the racism piece, but I agree with Charles on how we fix the racism piece.
So
very interesting approach. That's wonderful. When's it coming out?
September 28th, but it is available for pre-order now. And I found out that there are no rules saying that you can't buy 5 copies. Here, I thought you only had to buy 1, but no, you can buy as many as you want, they say.
The beauty of
very good.
So, but Charles, why do these, it seems so logical. You come out with these alternatives, we shouldn't end capitalism, but Black Lives Matter raised what looks to be more than $100 million, right? So why do these ideas seem to persist?
Well, I think it's a guilt thing. It's the anti-racist, because to me, the CRT, the anti-racist, the BLM, they're all the same thing. They're just different flavors, different looks, but they're all saying the same thing. But I think that there was such a emotional reaction to it that people don't really think that, to be honest, I don't think people think that they're donating to their own end. I don't think the CEO of PepsiCo is saying, I'm going to give this money to BLM because I don't like capitalism. Right? They're doing it because it's either going to buy their business some goodwill. Maybe they won't throw a brick at our window.
Right. And what's interesting, they maybe believe in capitalism so much that they're thinking, all right, if I make this investment, it'll insulate me. It'll insulate my business so I can then be productive. So
I'm paying not to have a brick thrown through the window, in theory. Right. So some of them are that. But others are just like, man, if police are this is why in one of the episodes, Nique, you asked about, I think it was Delano, you asked him about imagery or action. And I was always 100. He and I are simpatico. I agree with everything. But I was almost 100% that way. But now I say it's 50-50 because the imagery, remember I talked about the middle class Black who buys into X? The imagery is what made people think that they have to do X because this is what happens. So you flash these images across the screen and people, when I did a promo episode with Will quoted a study where they asked liberals how many unarmed Black men are killed every year by police. And as they went further left, the numbers went up. But the lowest of the liberals said 1,000, I think, in a year. Then it was 5,000, 10,000, and some say more than 10,000 when the number was 17. So my point has always been how you see a problem. See, this is how I put it. How you see a problem will dictate the methods you use to fix it. So if I felt that most Black people were okay, but 7% of them, 10% of them, 15% were struggling, we'll all get together and say, how do we fix this 15%? Most people left, right, or center would say, let's fix this 17%. Yep. But if I tell you that 90% of Black people are being shot in the street, then you know what you're going to say. Even if you're normative, burn it all down. That's a logical response because it's 90%. So because we've been painting a picture where most of us are in that situation, we get people who say, well, we got to do extra. We got to do whatever. We got to throw the rules out the window. We have to be, a progressive racist because that's the only way we can fix 90%. And then I go to people and my new motto is I'm going to make some t-shirts that we are the 97%. Because I ask people left, right, and center, every show I go on, I'll ask you all, what percentage of Blacks commit violent crime?
Oh, I'm with you. It's a single digit number.
2.7%. Wow. So I don't stop comparing it to the fact that it's higher than whites because whites is really low. The bottom line is that, so that means that 97% of us have never committed a violent crime, but we want to tear down the system to help the 2.7%. And I'm only talking violent crime. So we're going to tear down the system to help. In many cases, I'm not supposed to say this, but I can say this on Cut the Bull because we're honest. Horrible people who have robbed, raped, beaten, those are the people we're protecting. Why? Why can't we be like we were before? Racism is wrong. Police brutality is wrong. Fix those things. But I'm not going to sit here and defend a guy who's beating people up and shooting at people. But now you look at the high profile shootings, most of them, easily 90% of them were horrible human beings. And we have to build statues for. I'm supposed to bow at the altar of George Floyd now and act like he didn't do the things he was doing before then? Does that mean I wanted him shot? No, but I'm not going to bow at his statue. I'm not going to George Floyd Park, a Laquan McDaniel, who's a menace. I'm not going to his park. No. We have to just use some common sense.
Oh, man. All right. Well, Charles, so talk to us about Daryl, 16-year-old Daryl, who's living in the world that you're describing.
Yep.
Who Daryl might be in school, in his neighborhood. He's hearing all of this stuff.
Yep.
That, the whole world is against him. How do we have Daryl not succumb to this belief that, what's the point? Because everyone is against me.
It's getting harder every day. I think that I don't know what the full answer is now. My answer changes every 3 months with new craziness. I think now I would have to say, if I could put nothing else in you, I would talk to you about critical thinking skills and believing in yourself and your common sense. You can understand what you see before you. What color is this? What does this look like? Which one of these look better? If I tell you, if you like oranges better than grapes, if I keep telling you grape is the fruit of the day, you shouldn't just change your mind. So in that vein, when these upper middle class Blacks come to you and tell you your life is destined for failure because it's hard out here for a pimp, you have to ask yourself, but you drive a 2019 BMW. I've seen your house. So you have to say to yourself, because unfortunately, they're not going to tell you this. You got to say, I don't think your life is really that bad. So change the conversation. It's like, okay, just nod when they say that. Say, well, how do I do what you've done? So they don't go there and do it like they should. Ask the questions. When you see a successful Black man or woman, ask them how they got there. Ask them, what can they do? Just agree with them. Just ignore the part on racism because you live it. You see what happens in poor communities. I would say, ask them what do you suggest I do if I want to be an engineer or doctor, if I want to live a different life, if I want to travel to Paris, what do I do? Because at that point, you take the politics off the table and they're not going to give you a political answer there, I hope.
Right.
So that's what I would guess. I would try to push them in a way of analyzing what's around them and understanding that things aren't black and white and aren't as simple as they think, and they have to ask questions.
Yep. And maybe preach what they have practiced in their own lives to be
I
successful.
wish.
Right.
We would be so much better if they did that.
Yes. All right. Well, Mr. Charles Love, thank you very much for being our guest on The Invisible Men. For any of our listeners who want to see past episodes, you can go to www.invisible.men. And this is Ian Rowe.
And Nique Phasers. Charles, I just want to say I'm just, in one sentence, really happy that your voice is present and you're an important, very important part of the conversation. So thank you for your work.
I truly appreciate it. Ian, always a pleasure. Give me a call. Call you out on air.
Yeah, all right, exactly. But I love it. You would. All right, we're gonna connect. It's all good. It's all good. Charles, thanks for your work, man. It's very powerful.
I appreciate you. It's great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you for watching another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes at the AEI podcast channel on YouTube or the website invisible.men or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.